I feel like I'm in my Hollywood moment with this great light shining upon me. I really can't see all of you out there, but you are out there. I welcome you on behalf of the Basilian Network of Education and the New Evangelization. This weekend's meeting has been long in the planning, and we are very happy that you are here. A special welcome to those who are from outside Canada who are visiting for the first time. We welcome you in a warm way. This city is abuzz, as you know, with the Pan American Games, and I hope you get some chance to see the excitement around those games. I'd like to acknowledge the presence with us this morning of His Grace Archbishop Michael Miller, the Archbishop of Vancouver and a Basilian brother, and the Superior General of the Basilian Fathers, Father George Smith. My remarks are brief at this moment, but I really have to begin this conference by thanking three people in particular who have been utterly instrumental in making this weekend possible. Cynthia Watson, the Executive Assistant to the Basilian Superior General, Kathy D'Annunzio, the Executive Assistant to the Principal and President of St. Michael's College School, and Father Jefferson Thompson, the President of St. Michael's College School. For those of you who were at the school yesterday, you saw the great party that Father Thompson is known to throw. And we had a wonderful time, and I really want to thank all these three persons for the enormous amount of attention and help they have paid to every detail that would make this weekend a success. I now invite Father Smith to address us.
Good morning. It is a distinct privilege and pleasure for me to welcome you on behalf of the Basilian Fathers to the first summer conference of the Basilian Network for Education and the New Evangelization. This is a new moment for our congregation, for the Basilian Fathers. This is the first time that we have brought together in one place our collaborators in Catholic education from all of the schools sponsored by the Basilian Fathers in Canada, the United States, Colombia, and France. We celebrated a similar first a few weeks ago in our congregation when we brought together in Mexico City Basilian scholastics from Houston, Medellin, and Mexico City for the first multinational gathering of scholastics in our history. These firsts might well be attributed to the impact that our globalized world and church is having on our ministry. But it is, I think, the consequence of another reality that we Basilians are facing. That is the truth that the smaller we get as a religious congregation, the more important it is that we deepen our understanding of communion and mission. We Basilians deepen our understanding and experience of communion and mission so that we can share the depth of that understanding with you, our educational collaborators. But just as importantly, this gathering and the BNENE project itself makes it possible for Basilians to learn from you, our collaborators. We learn from you new ways to understand and experience communion and mission. And that is the most important point I think I want to leave with you this morning by way of introduction. We Basilians have more to learn than we do have to teach. And we will teach each other and learn from one another this weekend and in the days ahead. The Basilian Network for Education and the New Evangelization was first conceived in a widely unread letter that I wrote to our congregation in 2011 on the relationship between education, and the new evangelization. This was before I learned that Basilians are less apt to read letters from superiors general that pertain to conceptual and abstract ideas, but very inclined to read and comment upon letters about matters that impact their lives in concrete ways. But I had been struck by the important place that was accorded the mission of Catholic education in the 2011 Lineamenta for the Synod on the New Evangelization for the Transmission of the Christian Faith. And I was convinced that Basilians, still am, that Basilians had and have a unique opportunity to contribute to the task of the new evangelization precisely by dedicating ourselves to the rekindling of apostolic zeal for our greatest Basilian passion, Christian education. Furthermore, I was convinced that there was an intimate connection to be nurtured between our identity as Basilian priests and the mission of Catholic education to which we are dedicated. I was convinced, if you will, of the importance of drawing connections, particularly between priest and teacher, within the threefold munus of priest, prophet, and servant king, which of course we all share, though in different ways, by virtue of our baptism. I'm pleased to say that this realistic schema was translated into reality by a group of 10 Basilians who came together for several days on 3 occasions in Dickinson, Texas in January 2012, Alliston, Ontario in July 2013, and most recently here in Toronto last July in 2014. Each of these 10 Basilians graciously accepted to serve as a member of what then became the Basilian Network for Education and the New Evangelization, a kind of virtual apostolate, not located in one school, but existing whenever and wherever the members of the network interacted with one another around the important themes of Catholic education and Basilian schools. As a consequence of that spirited engagement between knowledge and experience, which is the common feature of Basilian discourse at its best, there gradually emerged the idea that the rekindling for our passion for Christian education was best ignited by a rediscovery and a reappropriation of the Church's teaching on Catholic education. That gave birth to the alliterative proposition that the singular contribution that Basilians could make to the new evangelization was to teach teachers what the Church teaches about teaching. In other words, if we have a patrimony to share as a religious congregation dedicated to Catholic education for 200 years, it should be communicated from the heart of the Church, ex corde ecclesiae, and the medium of that communication should not be any kind of manufactured Basilian hermeneutic, but rather the magisterial teachings of the Church on Catholic education themselves. And I should point out here that a primary inspiration for this ecclesial vision of our apostolic ministry was the episcopal ministry of our brother, Archbishop Michael Miller, to whose extraordinary expertise on the Church and Catholic education you will be introduced in a few moments. By our third meeting in the week leading up to the Basilian chapter of 2014, we had developed a clear statement of mission which clarified how we hope to serve and learn from our colleagues in the schools that we have sponsored in the past, sponsor now, and yes, indeed, might one day sponsor in the future. And so, according to our mission, the Basilian Network for Education and the New Evangelization, an initiative of the Superior General and Council, seeks to contribute to the new evangelization and specifically to Catholic education as one of its integral components. We strive to teach goodness, discipline, and knowledge through 3 initiatives. First, the ongoing formation of school leaders, teachers, support staff, and communities in the apostolate of Catholic education. Second, teaching what the Church teaches on teaching with clarity and conviction, that is through thoughtful and prayerful reading of and reflection on key magisterial teachings on Catholic education. And three, through encouraging and promoting the educational ministry of our schools and eventually of others as a collaborative ministry that includes all who serve them. Now, there are some key concepts which I wish to underline as a preface to this conference and which constitutes a sort of raison d'etre for inviting you to come from great distances to be here this weekend. What are these key concepts? Ongoing formation, leadership, the apostolate, the magisterial teachings of the Church on Catholic education, prayerful reflection, ministry, collaboration. These are the building blocks of this conference and of every subsequent program to which this project will give rise. Let me emphasize something about all of these concepts. Each of us shares a responsibility to give life to them as a consequence of our common baptism. They are the common elements of the vocation that each of us has been given by God as educators in Catholic schools. And each of us, gathered here in Toronto from 3 continents, can enter into a kind of communion into which we Basilians hope when you return to your schools, you will invite your colleagues and your students. This communion that we will share and experience will find its source and center at our Sunday morning Eucharist tomorrow morning. And following that Eucharist, each of us will be commissioned to be ministers of that communion to those with whom we collaborate and whom God has called us to serve. I'll conclude this morning by offering an expression of thanks to a number of people, joining with Father de Souza. First, I thank the 10 Basilians who came together to constitute the Basilian Network for Education and the New Evangelization. Fathers Michael Bunteo, Mario de Souza, Patrick Fulton, Jack Gallagher, Terry Kirsch, Donald Lococo, Donald McLeod, Jim Murphy, Maurice Restivo, and Jefferson Thompson. Father Thompson, our gracious host this weekend, thank you. I also thank the planning committee for this conference, Fathers de Souza, Lococo, and McLeod, in addition to my assistant, Cynthia Watson, who together with Kathy has been an indispensable partner in logistical planning. I also want to draw your attention to the wonderful news on behalf of our General Council. I announce the wonderful news that Father Mario de Souza himself, Associate Professor in the Faculty of Theology at the University of St. Michael's College and its former Dean, has accepted the appointment, in addition to his responsibilities as a professor, has accepted the appointment as the first Executive Director of the Basilian Network for Education and the New Evangelization. Through his leadership, Father de Souza will coordinate the work of the network, ensure that there is a close collaborative partnership between the network and the leadership of our schools, and will be a constant and reliable pastoral presence for those who serve our schools. Most importantly and finally, I thank you, our collaborators, who have come from Annonay and Cali and Houston and Detroit and Toronto to give once again of yourselves in ways that bless the Basilian Fathers, that bless your schools, and that bless your students. When our congregation founded the schools that today are called Basilian, we could never have imagined the extent to which we would have been blessed by God with colleagues of such profound faith, of such rich expertise and experience. We could never have imagined how much we would be taught by you about goodness, discipline, and knowledge. For these gifts which you have given us, and for your presence here this weekend, we give thanks to God and to you. Now, one more thing I'd like to do, if Father de Souza would indulge me. I am about 2/3 of the way through teaching a summer course in ecclesiology for Newman College in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. I flew back last night, and I'll fly back at the end of our conference. Thanks to the media resources of St. Michael's College School, this morning's proceedings are being videotaped. And one of the benefits of that, at least for me, there'll be many benefits of it, but for me, one of the benefits of it is that on Tuesday morning, instead of a lecture from me on the church and Catholic schools, the students in this course will be watching and listening to Archbishop Miller speak with much greater eloquence and wisdom on the same subject. So I greet the students of Ecclesiology 453S, and I take this opportunity to thank them for what has been a magnificent learning experience, one that I have enjoyed enormously. Okay, now I turn things over to Father De Souza. Thank you.
Thank you, Father Smith. Basilians are very proud of Archbishop Miller, our own brother amongst us, and so may I introduce him to you this morning. An introduction that doesn't need to be done, but his many accomplishments need to be celebrated. Archbishop Michael Miller, Chief Shepherd of Vancouver's 450,000 Catholics since January of 2009, has been a prominent part of the city's religious landscape since 2007, when Pope Benedict XVI named him a coadjutor archbishop to assist Archbishop Raymond Roussan. In the 40 years since his ordination, he has held a remarkable number of positions, from university president to the Holy See Secretary for Catholic Education. In addition to teaching theology in seminaries in Mexico and Rome, he has served on the boards of schools, universities, healthcare institutions, and professional and public service organizations. He is Grand Prior of the Western Canadian Lieutenancy of the Equestrian Order of the Knights of the Holy Sepulchre and a member of the Knights of Columbus. Born in Ottawa in 1946, Archbishop Miller grew up in the nation's capital before attending the University of Toronto. It was there that he entered the novitiate of the Basilian Fathers, making his first profession of vows in 1966. His original field of interest was Latin American studies, and he earned his bachelor's degree at the University of Toronto in 1969, followed by his master's at the University of Wisconsin. After teaching high school for a year, he earned his Master of Divinity at the University of St. Michael's College, Toronto, and then went to Rome to complete his licentiate and doctorate in theology at the Pontifical Gregorian University. In 1975, he was ordained a priest by Blessed Pope Paul VI. Archbishop Miller joined the theology faculty at the University of St. Thomas in Houston in 1979 and subsequently served as the university's chair and as dean of the School of Theology at St. Mary's Seminary. In 1990, he was named St. Thomas's first vice president for academic affairs. In 1997, he became the university's president. From 1992 to 1997, Archbishop Miller worked in the Vatican Secretariat of State, and in 2003, Pope St. John Paul II appointed him to the episcopacy and named him secretary to the Vatican's Congregation for Catholic Education and vice president of the pontifical work of priestly vocations. As a senior official of the Roman Curia, he served as a member of the Vatican's Pontifical Council for Pastoral Care of Migrants and Itinerant Peoples, for the Pontifical Committee for International Eucharistic Congresses, and as a consultor to the Congregation of Bishops. Archbishop Miller currently serves on the Commission for Christian Unity of the Canadian Conference of Catholic Bishops and represents the conference at the Pontifical Committee for the International Eucharistic Congresses. In addition to English, Archbishop Miller is fluent in Spanish, Italian, and French. He has received 6 honorary doctorates from universities around the world and is a specialist on the papacy and modern papal teachings. He has written several books on topics ranging from the Holy See's teaching on Catholic schools to the development of the papacy and the encyclicals of Pope John Paul II. In addition to his positions as Chancellor of St. Mark's College and Corpus Christi College in Vancouver, Archbishop Miller is president of the Catholic Independent Schools of the Vancouver Archdiocese. And since his arrival in Vancouver, he has implemented the Apostolate of Catholic Education for Teachers, established a First Nations Ministry Office, opened an official communications office, and overseen the launch of new and highly regarded website. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Archbishop Miller.
You're kind. Brother Basilians and ladies and gentlemen, thanks very much, Father De Sousa, for your kind introduction. But above all, thank you for the opportunity to address you at this, the summer conference of the Basilian Network for Education and the New Evangelization. I was certainly happy to accept Mario's invitation that came to me about a year ago to speak to you about the vocation and the mission of the Catholic educator today. My focus with you, of course, will be on secondary education, though perhaps the remarks might be helpful for someone involved in either primary or tertiary education. After commitment to the family, dear colleagues, your way of discipleship follows the road of being an educator. You've been called to live your vocation as a baptized Catholic precisely in the educational sphere. When St. Paul describes the gifts that the Lord has given to his church, he includes teaching among the most important. No surprise here. Go teach was, after all, the final mandate of Jesus. 50 years ago, and it hardly seems possible that it's 50 years, the fathers at the Second Vatican Council referred to the vocation of an educator as splendid, and therefore of the highest importance. You have, they maintained, a vocation that is rightly called supernatural. You do more than exercise a socially valuable profession, it is that. You are performing an invaluable ministry or service to the ecclesial and social community. In light of what I shall develop later in the talk, I want to remind Catholic educators of their responsibility to attend to their relationship with Jesus Christ. 30 years ago in Australia, Pope St. John Paul II addressed a group of educators, and he said this, and it's very applicable. To them he said, "Your attitude towards Christ and your personal closeness to him are fundamental. Closely linked to this are your attitude towards the church and your sense of having a special mission within her. You're not isolated agents in an impersonal bureaucracy. You're not merely professional educators. You are called to be faith-inspired collaborators in the heart of the Christian community." There can be no doubt, and Father Smith alluded to this, that ongoing spiritual formation ought to occupy a privileged place in your professional life, in your professional development. Everyone is called continually to deeper personal union with the Lord. If your work as an educator does not flow from this personal encounter, then no matter how accomplished it is, your ministry will lack the vital soul needed for it to bear truly lasting fruit. Not only do Catholic educators have a noble vocation, we live this calling where? Within the church. And this morning I want to share with you some reflections on your ecclesial mission by beginning with the challenge set out for the church of our own day in the thrilling and demanding apostolic exhortation of Pope Francis. In Evangelii Gaudium, The Joy of the Gospel, published a year ago last November, he calls every person and every structure in the church, including institutions and those who staff them, to assess their mission, to give an account of it before God and before the Christian community, by asking themselves how well they are carrying out the Lord's mandate to live, proclaim, and hand on the gospel of Jesus Christ. This revolution that the Holy Father has ignited is setting us on course for a new chapter of evangelization in the church's life. And like Popes John Paul II and Benedict XVI before him, he regards evangelization as the church's primary mission. He has indeed thrown down the gauntlet, and he invites all Catholics to share his dream, that dream of what he calls a missionary option, and I quote him, that is, a missionary impulse capable of transforming everything so that the church's customs, ways of doing things, times and schedules, languages and structures can be suitably channeled for the evangelization of today's world rather than for her self-preservation. For the Pope, every person and every teacher, that means every educator and every school or college or university in the church, is to be put into a missionary key. All our structures are being called to be more intentionally mission-oriented. If we want to put our educational ministry in our schools into this missionary key, we will have to abandon any complacent attitude that says, we've always done it this way, and we can tinker with it and make some small improvements. Again, Francis is to the point, as he so often is. I invite everyone to be bold and creative in this task of rethinking the goals, structure, style, and methods of evangelization in their respective communities, our educational communities. Catholic educators are no exception to this invitation. You are being issued an urgent appeal to chart a new way forward for carrying out the evangelizing mission in your schools. But what are the practical ramifications of this Franciscan revolution for you as Catholic educators? How are you to respond to this challenge? What does it mean for you, for us, to put the fostering of evangelization in the school at the center of its educational program? I would suggest that if educators are to be effective in this task, then they must understand what is central to the gospel they're called to proclaim. Schools aren't Catholic, after all, because our students wear uniforms, or perhaps are more disciplined, or because we have religious symbols on our walls. They are Catholic because they profess a name, that name which is above every other name. At the heart of Catholic education, it says in a document released last year by the Congregation for Catholic Education, at the heart of Catholic education, there is always Jesus Christ. Everything that happens in Catholic schools, it continues, should lead to an encounter with the living Christ. Francis couldn't be more direct when he talks about the core of the gospel. I'll give you a couple citations from homilies and Joy in the Gospel. The church's mission of evangelization is essentially a proclamation of God's love, mercy, and forgiveness revealed to us in the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. He continues, therefore, the first proclamation must ring out over and over again. Jesus Christ loves you. He gave his life to save you, and now he is living at your side every day to enlighten, strengthen, and free you. This is the charismatic core of the gospel, the beauty of the saving love of God manifest to us in Jesus, who died and rose for our salvation. Once we accept that the church's primary mission is proclaiming Jesus and his gospel, then it becomes, I think, self-evident that education itself shares, in its particular way, in this same mission. And although Catholic schools have always been linked to the church's wider mission of evangelization, I believe that today it is more necessary than ever for Catholic educators to accept this new responsibility of bearing witness in the schools to Christ and to the gospel. Through its teachers, staff, every Catholic school is called to be, as Benedict said when he was at CUA a few years ago, every Catholic school is called to be a place to encounter the living God, who in Jesus Christ reveals his transforming love and truth. Francis's call for a culture of encounter begins with that first and necessary encounter with Jesus. And so Catholic schools are institutions where the gospel is faithfully lived, proclaimed, and passed on. I'm convinced that the key to Catholic schools which take their evangelizing mission seriously, like those sponsored, of course, by the Basilian Fathers, is the commitment of all the educators, to being fully and authentically Catholic, since it depends on them whether the Catholic school is able to achieve its purpose. Depends upon persons. In light of what I've said about the school's mission of evangelizing in that particular and appropriate way to an educational institution, teachers have, therefore, an evangelizing mission. The individuals do. And a person with such a mission is rightly called an evangelizer, educators as evangelizers. Most of you are, I'm sure, because I'm certainly not used to thinking of yourselves or your colleagues as evangelizers. And for pretty good reason. Like most Catholics, the term evangelizer often conjures up something or someone that is comical, hypocritical, strange, someone with a sort of one-sentence line like a Joel Osteen or a Jerry Falwell or an Elmer Gantry, peppered with biblical quotes. It's not firebrand preaching that is expected, but the embracing of the church's mission insofar as it concerns the particular corner of the vineyard where you find yourself. How do you bring that message to what you do as an educator in your school? How are you transforming the culture through the activity in light of the gospel, in light of Jesus? I've certainly made a simple point so far, The church is called to preach the gospel, the good news. Within the church, the Catholic school shares in that mission, and those who carry out that mission in the school are primarily the educators, the evangelizers. From your own personal encounter with God's love, that's where you find the source and the inspiration to be able to do this. And because of that, as Francis keeps telling us, if we have that in our hearts, how can we fail to share that gift given to us with others? How can we fail? Now, the rest of my remarks, I'd like to sort of structure around several questions. If I have time, though, I'll use 5. Several questions that Catholic educators can use if they want some objective way of assessing how am I contributing to the church's evangelizing mission? What can I sort of look at? And I give you 5 questions. First, is your educational philosophy grounded in a Christian understanding of the human person? Secondly, do you strive to imbue your school community with a Catholic worldview, a Weltanschauung? Third, do you try to integrate the vision of faith throughout the curriculum and all the activities of the school, that it's not sectioned off, left perhaps to seasoned religion experts? Fourth, do you give personal witness to the gospel? And fifth, do you foster a spirituality of communion among all the school stakeholders, students, colleagues, parents, priests, bishops, so on? First, I suggest that you examine honestly the understanding of the human person, your students, your colleagues, mostly your students, which underlies your educational philosophy, whether that be explicit or more often implicit. Simple question, is it founded on Jesus Christ? In your commitment to the development of the whole person, because that's what we commit ourselves to, where do we look? Catholic educators must first look to Christ, the perfect person, the perfect man, since in him all human values find their fulfillment and unity. Herein lies the specific philosophy of Catholic educators. Their duty is to cultivate human values, or their duty to cultivate human values has its origin in the person of Christ. We know well the section from the Second Vatican Council's Pastoral Constitution on the Church in the Modern World, Gaudium et Spes, which there's a citation in number 22, cited so frequently by John Paul II, but it hits right at the nail, hits the nail on the head. It is only in the mystery of the Word made flesh that the mystery of the human person truly becomes clear. We understand who we are in light of our understanding of who Christ is. And education, as we know, is not a commodity, even if our students are being prepared, of course, to serve the world in which we live. But teachers are to form students in light of something other than their usefulness for the market. They're to see their students in light of their transcendent dignity, so often ignored. That young people, like us, old people, that they have a supernatural destiny is a fundamental truth for Catholic educators. Our students are certainly to be taught, educated in how to live in this world and make a contribution to it. We can't forget that the eyes still have to be focused, or they at least have to look out and gaze upon the kingdom that is to come. Because if we get it wrong about who our students are, what their destiny is, people created in God's image and likeness, then from the very outset we're going to go off track. We'll see them somehow as commodities, as nice people, and so on. Using blunt language, I think we can say that Catholic education's main aim is indeed to produce, we shouldn't be afraid to say it, good Christians, good Catholics, ultimately men and women who fall in love with the Lord. Catholic teachers recognize that their evangelizing mission should, in the simplest terms, and this is, I don't think, overly reductive, that we want to help our students to become saints. The alternative is not very attractive, that we would lead them elsewhere. And so Catholic educators have to take seriously the fostering in their students as well of a personal relationship with Christ. They can't just teach about him. They will have to teach him. Christ has to be at the center of our educational commitment. A second question I'd ask you to consider touches upon the kind of ethos that is promoted in the school. Do you foster a Catholic view of the world? Or is it just the same view found at a good school down the way? This is really important, because what students come to know and to accept as true, as valuable, as worthwhile in life is largely determined by the attitude or the stance towards life, the world, God, which teachers convey. G.K. Chesterton, as you know, that our famous Catholic apologist, polemicist, wrote an essay more than 100 years ago called The New Case for Catholic Schools. And he insisted that every education teaches a philosophy, if not by dogma, then by suggestion, by implication, by atmosphere. And Chesterton believed that a Catholic atmosphere should creep into the nooks and crannies, therefore, of schools which call themselves Catholic. If it's not this ecclesial ethos that permeates, then a secular one inevitably fills the void. As a church, we are heirs, and we should be grateful to this, of a great tradition, an enormous treasury, which is moral, artistic, spiritual, scientific, and intellectual. And a Catholic school's evangelizing mission includes immersing students in appropriate ways and different ways in this rich tradition, to develop in them the sense of what is true, what is beautiful, what is good. Because there is a Catholic take on the world. We're not just people with a few sort of moral values, nice things. We have a vision. We have something that is wide, that is, whose horizons are ultimately eternity. We have a culture that has been shaped by reflection, action, service, prayer, all grounded ultimately in the Lord and in the church which he founded. That's the atmosphere that I think we should be looking to foster in our schools. Your third concern, I would suggest, should deal with your school's curriculum. Searching for the water. Here it is. Should deal with your school's curriculum. Does it strive overall to integrate this vision of faith into what you teach and to what your students learn. After all, it's through a curriculum that a school really expresses what it believes to be important. That's why at all levels people engage in, if not fights, great discussions about curriculum. They understand it's important. Every curriculum makes explicit what the school's reference values are, and so on. So it's helpful here that for Catholics, Catholic educators, that they keep reminding themselves of all truth comes from the same divine source, and that they recognize that faith and reason together illuminate the path, the search for and discovery of truth. Our schools then are not just faith-based, they're faith and reason-based schools. That's a great Catholic heritage that we can't let go of in a world which often, in fact, downplays the importance of rational thought and reason. The curriculum, therefore, must help the students reflect on the great problems facing us: environmental degradation, injustice, poverty, the denial of human rights, all of which are widespread. And that's why a comprehensive and solid teaching of the Church's social doctrine is a sine qua non within the curriculum of a school which wants to be Catholic. This would certainly, I think, now include serious study of Pope Francis's recent encyclical, Laudato Si, which, as he wrote, is now added to the body of the Church's social teaching. This past Tuesday, the Holy Father addressed the educators at the Pontifical Catholic University of Ecuador in Quito. And thanks to Tom Rosica, I have an English translation of his remarks, and this is something that he said. This is directly Francis. "My question to you as educators is this: do you watch over your students, helping them to develop a critical sense, an open mind capable of caring for today's world, a spirit capable of seeking new answers to the varied challenges that society sets before you? Are you able to encourage them not to disregard the world around them?" Besides, of course, providing instruction in specific areas, Catholic educators should make the effort, and it is an effort, to integrate faith into the different sort of areas of curriculum and activity. This is what it means, I believe, to communicate, share this Catholic world view. And always remember, we have the wider vision. Certainly, the world, for example, needs good scientists, but scientific outlook becomes narrow if it's not open to the wider ethical and indeed spiritual questions that allow us to see it in this much wider light. Fourthly, I would say that the vocation and mission of today's Catholic educators is intimately linked to the kind of personal witness they give to the gospel in the classroom or in the office. In other words, to fulfill their mission, they must be examples of Christian life. And that's why at all levels and in sort of all documents, there's always this great concern that educators be outstanding, not only, it always says this, in their ability, their teaching ability or their professional qualifications, but also in their knowledge of the Church's faith and in the way they are striving to appropriate that faith in their own lives. Why is this important? Because, as Benedict once said, the central figure in the work of educating is specifically the form of witness. And those words that we keep hearing over and over again, they're from Pope Paul VI from 1974, when he said this: "Modern man listens more willingly to witnesses than to teachers. And if it does listen to its teachers, it is because they are witnesses." This is certainly confirmed in the social media age in which we live. Therefore, an important aspect of a teacher's evangelizing mission is simply the duty to communicate daily the joy of being a Christian. This is often, we know this from stories, people remember, they forget what we said, they even misunderstood what we said. But they remember the witness of teachers. They remember things like kindness, fidelity, integrity. They remember when the fruits of the Spirit are evident, when educators manifest a kind of joy, kind of patience, goodness, gentleness. They also remember grumpiness, meanness, harshness. A disgruntled, of course, or dissident teacher is a fish out of water in a Catholic school. Catholic schools, which by definition are meant to be places where the love of Christ and his gospel is understood sort of at the bottom line. And the last area I'll suggest that you look at if you want to assess the effectiveness of your evangelizing mission as a Catholic educator takes up the kind of community that you foster in your school. St. John Paul II wrote a document in 2001 called Novo Millennio in Eunte, on the kind of the start of the third millennium, sort of instructions, his reflections for the church. And among the things he said was this: to make the church the home and the school of communion. Before making practical plans, we need to promote a spirituality of communion, making it the guiding principle of education. This spirituality has its source, evidently, in the doctrine of the communion of persons within the Holy Trinity. But it plays itself out in the kind of trust and openness that is evident among the various stakeholders within the school community. There was a document published by the congregation a few years ago called Educating Together in Catholic Schools, and it said, in the Catholic school, the spirituality of communion must become the living breath of the educational community, the criterion for the full ecclesial development of its members, and the fundamental point of reference for the implementation of its shared vision. Such a spirituality, when it exists within the school community, makes it possible for educators to carry out their mission of proclaiming the gospel as Jesus did. And Vatican documents, I cite a raft of them here, stress over and over again that one of the great movements in sort of contemporary Catholic education is the movement away from seeing the school primarily as an institution to seeing the school as a place of communion at all levels. One, of course, can sort of flesh this out by describing the kinds of relationship that should exist between, for example, educators and parents, the kind of relationships that should exist between educators and students, the kinds of relationships that should exist among colleagues, between administrators and staff, and so on. A spirituality of communion makes possible the atmosphere in which the school can truly fulfill its mission It's also one of the ways in which it does this. It's not just an instrument, it's also a manifestation. My time, I see, is up. I hope that there's one thing that we grasp, is the importance that we give to evangelizing, which has a content, and it does mean, at the end of the day, making Jesus Christ known. Jesus Christ with all that implies, Jesus Christ with his body. But it seems to me a failure to name the name or to drift into a somewhat vague spirituality is not what is being asked of the church at the present moment. We are being kind of presented with a challenge at all levels. This new missionary key, this missionary dream. Pope Francis is a living example in so many different ways. But it cuts, he has something specific to say and wants to raise these questions also within institutions and educational communities. The answers are not sort of all there. There are pages here that have to be written, and that certainly the school sponsored by the Basilian Fathers with a century-old, more than a century and a half old tradition, have something to say, something to offer. But I think if we're going to offer anything, it's got to be in light of taking account of this great vision that Pope Francis has placed before us. Thanks very much, folks, and I think there's time now for Q&A, right, Mario? If anybody has a question or an observation, it doesn't have to be a question. The usual silence. Okay. I'll hold out for silence for a moment, and then Mario has to come up and rescue me. Yes.
Thank you very much, Archbishop, for your talk.
Sorry, I don't know you by name, but okay.
Teach you at work at St. Michael's College School. It used to be years ago that the Catholic mission, if you will, was a collegial work of the home, the school, and the parish.
Right.
Of course, a school like St. Michael's College School doesn't have
A parish.
connection. In line with that is, I think, a challenge around the sacramental life. Again, I think it used to be among Catholics that there was a recognition that to be Catholic meant to be very much involved with the sacramental life of the church. And I'm not sure that, certainly for many of our families who send their sons to St. Michael's, although many of them are very involved in their parishes, a lot of them aren't, and they don't see that as a problem. How would you respond to that? Is that accurate, and what would your comments be?
That's very accurate, because, for example, the system that I'm most used to now is still very parochial, except at the high school level, and Vancouver College is very equivalent to St. Here to SMC or to Basilian schools, and it represents a real thing. We still rely upon a school like Vancouver College to provide sacramental preparation, for example, for confirmation, and because it also has a junior school for First Communion that is then brought to the parish. They take part in the CCD program of the parish. But this is a major challenge of schools that are not attached to parishes, that there can be a separation of the integrity of Catholic life, which necessarily includes a sacramental dimension. It used to be provided for because there were lots of priests and so on staff. And there was an immediate a visible ecclesial presence. That's something I think that's something that if you could kind of think about that and offer suggestions, that'd be very helpful to people like me, because we face the same things in what we call our congregational schools. But you're right. Father Jack.
The teachers I'm dealing with, have contact with in Edmonton, the ones who are most devoted, the great, I think, central problem for them is how do we witness to our colleagues who are paid by the same board
Yeah.
and who do not have the same kind of evangelical thrust.
Yeah.
And that stymies us. Let's see, that's where we all stop and can't get any further.
Yeah, I tell you what, one thing that we've done, it's a beginning, well, in Vancouver, you know, what happens, of course, everybody is supposed to come into the system or come into the school, you know, kind of vetted, but that turns out de facto not to be the case, is that we now have, in many of our schools, we're doing for teachers, Alpha. Do you know the Alpha program? Which is a fundamental, basic evangelization. It was started in England, but they'll do that, or CCO, the Catholic Christian Outreach Discovery Series, is now in place for adults, and that we're putting that, inviting people in the school to do that. Not everybody comes, but we've found that there's a sufficient number in each school that the isolation that people who are more, how would I say, they're more into their faith, or they really grasp it, often feel isolated, that this has given them a tremendous boost, so that the overall atmosphere of the school is, this is who we are. It's been those programs, both Alpha and the CCO Discovery Series, which is now adapted for parish and adult use, not just university kids, are both very effective tools that are in place of fundamental, basic evangelization. Teachers get together, 45 minutes before class, once a week. They're helpful. Other observations? Yes.
I have a question about the use of the Alpha and the CCO program.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, were those programs made, Sean Stokes, St. Michael's College School.
Yeah, great.
Were those programs made obligatory for new staff, or were they just merely offered as an invitation?
They're offered.
Okay, with the hope of a kind of leavening.
Right, but there's an offer that is just, this is sort of, it's offered with, this is kind of who we are, but it can't be forced, because someone who really doesn't want to be there, it's not effective.
And then it's not evangelization.
Then it's not. But what we want to do is try to make it so that this is sort of the norm.
Right.
And that those who don't share this, well, they're the ones that should feel, they're a little, out of step, not the other way around.
Because one of the challenges when you're dealing with young people, sometimes we catch ourselves in the mirror if you're in front of a group of kids and you sort of are sounding off as an authority on things, especially when you're talking about God.
Yeah.
And in those moments you realize with a kind of humility that you're really sort of treading on sacred ground. But young kids are so open to us sometimes, yes. and they're so receptive that that we sort of plow through and we muddle along. With colleagues, that ground becomes a little more sacred still, because you're dealing with grown-ups and their experiences, and sometimes even their experiences of alienation in their experience of Catholic life and the Catholic community, and they and even people who find themselves maybe in a different position in relation to the church's life than maybe somebody who would identify as more readily as a committed Catholic. They have their reasons as well. And pastorally, what do you see as kind of necessary in a Catholic school to be able to kind of somehow not sort of engage those people to necessarily change their view, but to include those people so that they understand that their participation in the communion of the school that you're talking about doesn't sort of begin when they change their mind, but that it's already started? Yeah,
well, I would think part of that would be two thoughts came to me. One is that the school community is a whole and welcomes everyone who shares in a common mission. I also see increasing the importance at every level in the life of the church, and particularly in our institutions, and schools are our primary, besides parishes, of providing opportunities for smaller groups of people to be able to interact about their faith. Not just, I mean, there are groups where people are, how would I say, sort of more fervent and given to certain, and there's others where they're not, but we just need those occasions more than ever, that of smaller groups, in some place they're called basic communities, whatever you want to call them, for people to be able to truly share their faith, what they believe, their love of Christ, and obviously the challenges that come. But to provide that sort of space, we need that space. It can't be handled, at a teacher's meeting or all faculty staff meeting. It just can't. We're not going to go there during those things. We operate on different levels. We need to have some place where the mask can come down a little. And I think administrators have to be able to start to think of providing such, or getting teachers to ask, that kind of thing. Because at every level, parishes need that too. Our most successful parishes, I look to our Korean parish that has more than 100 small groups, and every year they have, at the Easter Vigil, there are 100 people baptized, because people are in small groups evangelizing one another, and then knowing that they have to kind of grow, that they're not self-centered. And I do see that as one of the ways in which the church as an institution goes forward. Any other? Yeah, sure.
I work in admissions.
Okay.
I think one of the challenges is maintaining that Catholic identity of the school, promoting that, but at the same time, not alienating the 20% of our students who are not Catholic from our institution
Right.
that we rely on to keep the school
Right.
full.
My own read on that, because that thing is everywhere, is that we're more than good at not alienating people, and the people who come to our schools, usually they're attracted often, even if they're not Catholic, because of what we stand for and believe in. I think sometimes we're almost sort of out of the way, because why do they come? I mean, Muslims come to our school because they're attracted to that this is that they know this is a Catholic school, or non-Catholics, I don't think that most people mind when we do what we say we are. Never proselytizing, never offensive, but being who we are. It's like if someone said, my child is upset when they look at a crucifix, you have to kind of think, this isn't the right place for that child. We made a mistake at entry. We didn't explain enough who we are.
How do we help our tremendously busy parents as the number one faith educators of their children when they're so involved in the world,
All right.
competitive world, and trying to get their children that up place?
Yeah.
Whether it's in sports or
Activities.
they're very, very busy, and
Right.
somehow the world has let Sunday morning, for instance, be prime time
For
for
soccer. Yeah.
how do we convey to them that they still are the number one faith educators of their children?
Boy, that you've hit upon something. I'm not sure how much. I think the school can do something about it. I see that much more as frankly, a parochial responsibility. That we have to sort of try to resacralize Sunday, and also keep reminding parents, and the school is only one means through which this is done, that if they're really serious about certain things, I know families that they make conscious decisions that their kids are not going to do. They're going to teach their children that if they're going to be Christians, they're going to make sacrifices. One of the sacrifices they're going to make is they're not going to be able to do sports on Sunday morning. And that takes them sometimes out of some competitions. I don't know how we can escape in the future making that kind of decision, because it's going to be in every area of life. The school can help, but the school doesn't often get parents. People who have access to parents are parishes. And I think, the heavier, although we share everything, I think that's something that we have to keep reminding priests and those responsible for preaching, passing on, because that's a huge problem, particularly among upper middle class parents, who are often the ones who would seek us be able to come to St. Michael's or to Vancouver College and Little Flower. I think you're on, Mario, is that right? It's 10:15, and that's what you told me.
This is not by way of a shameful self-promotion, but at the Faculty of Theology, I teach a course called Catholic Educational Documents, which are the Holy See's documents on Catholic education. And one of the books that we read for that course is authored by Archbishop Miller, called 5 Essential Marks of Catholic Schools. And I recommend it to you when you go home, if you don't own a copy, to order one from Amazon. Archbishop Miller spoke to us this morning as Archbishop, of course, a shepherd, a teacher, but primarily as a witness, and he touched our hearts in that regard. So please join me in thanking him once again for his address to us. In the very handsome portfolios that this school has made available for you, you will find a couple of sheets that divides you into tables. So we'll now take a short break. And if you look at your sheets, you are divided into tables and into a classroom. So we'll go back, I think, to the cafeteria for a break. And then if you make your way to your classrooms, please, by 10:30, we should be making good time. Thank you.